What if you were engineered to be empty? No emotions, no desires, no ability to create life. That's what they did to Seris until a human scientist and his alien daughter showed her what it means to be truly alive. This is a story of awakening against all odds, where the most revolutionary act isn't destroying a system, but proving it was wrong all along. She was built strong, silent, and sterile. That's how they kept her obedient. I remember the first time I saw her standing alone at the edge of the mining facility on Velar 4. Most people would call Seris beautiful, I suppose. Her skin had that muted blue hue typical of engineered hybrids, her eyes deep and observant. But beauty wasn't the point. She was designed for function, not feeling. You see, Seris wasn't quite human and wasn't quite as alien. She was something in between. A biological tool created by the Velar Consortium to withstand the harsh atmospheric conditions of the mining planet without the expensive protective gear humans required. The perfect worker, the perfect servant. I'd been studying these hybrids for years, trying to understand why the corporation would go to such lengths. Their answer was always the same: efficiency. But as I watched Seris methodically inspect a ventilation shaft moving with mechanical precision, I saw something else. Something they worked very hard to eliminate. The hybridization process itself wasn't the problem. Humans had been modifying themselves genetically for space exploration for generations. What disturbed me was how they ensured compliance. Every Series-class hybrid was engineered with three critical limitations: minimal emotional processing, no reproductive capabilities, and a shortened lifespan. Can't have the tools getting ideas, my supervisor had joked when I first arrived. If they could reproduce, they might start thinking they deserve rights. I remember how my stomach turned when he said it. The way he looked at Seris and her kind, not as people, but as equipment with expiration dates. That morning, I watched her from the observation deck. The other workers gave her a wide berth, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. Hybrids like Seris existed in a terrible limbo. They weren't accepted by humans who saw them as artificial. And they weren't embraced by the native Valerians, who viewed them as perversions of natural biology. She was alone, completely and utterly alone. I'd seen her file. Seris was one of the more successful models. Cerebral capacity slightly above human average, perfect recall, enhanced lung capacity for the thin atmosphere. And like all her kind, she'd been through the sterilization process that removed not just her reproductive organs, but the neurological pathways that would allow her to feel deep connection. The report used clinical language about preventing pair bonding behaviors and eliminating maternal impulses. What they meant was they had cut away her capacity to love. As she finished her inspection and moved toward the eastern tunnels, I noticed something peculiar. She paused near a cluster of native flora that had pushed through a crack in the facility's outer wall. A splash of vibrant purple against the dull gray of industrial steel. For just a moment, her hand moved toward one of the flowers. She didn't touch it, just hovered her fingers above the petals as though imagining what it might feel like. Then she caught herself, straightened her posture, and continued her rounds. That tiny gesture stayed with me. The corporation insisted these hybrids couldn't feel emotion, that they were empty vessels designed for labor. Yet I'd seen something in that brief forbidden reach toward beauty, something very human. I didn't know then that in 3 days' time, everything would change. I didn't know that a man and his strange little girl would arrive on the morning transport carrying with them a future that none of us, especially not Seris, could possibly imagine. I couldn't have known that the woman engineered without a future was about to find one. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest connections. And sometimes those deemed incapable of love are the very ones who teach us what it truly means. The morning the transport ship arrived, the facility was buzzing with unusual energy. New personnel were rare on Velar 4. Most humans couldn't handle the isolation, the constant machinery hum, or the knowledge that the nearest emergency evac was 16 hours away at best. I was monitoring atmospheric readings when the alert came through. A standard cargo delivery, plus 2 civilian passengers, Dr. Elias Mercer, xenobotanist, and his daughter Lyra. My supervisor muttered something about corporate finally sending someone to investigate the strange plant mutations in the southern quadrant. What caught my attention wasn't the scientist, though. It was the mention of a child. Children never came to mining worlds. Never. I pulled up their files immediately. Dr. Mercer's credentials were impressive. A leading researcher in adaptive plant biology with a focus on cross-species pollination. But it was the daughter's medical records that made me stop cold. 8 years old. Mixed genetic heritage. Mother, classified. I'd been around long enough to read between those particular lines. The girl was half Valerian. When they stepped off the transport, I instantly saw it. Elias Mercer was tall, weathered with that haunted look of someone who'd seen too many worlds. Nothing remarkable there. But the child at his side, she was extraordinary. Lyra had her father's dark hair and height, but her skin carried the faintest lavender undertone. And her eyes, they were distinctly Valerian, large with vertical pupils that expanded and contracted with the light. In that moment, I understood why Dr. Mercer had been sent to this particular outpost. Where better to hide a half-alien daughter than on her mother's homeworld, far from the bureaucratic oversight of Central Command. The foreman gave them the standard welcome. Safety protocols, living quarters assignment, mess hall schedule. Dr. Mercer nodded at all the right moments, his hand never leaving his daughter's shoulder. The girl seemed unimpressed by the adults, her attention wandering to the facility itself. The pipes, the vents, the workers. And then she saw Seris. The hybrid was performing routine maintenance on an air filtration unit, her movements precise and efficient. I watched as Lyra's eyes widened. Without warning, she broke away from her father and darted across the loading bay. "But Lyra," Mercer called, panic in his voice. "Come back here." The girl ignored him, slowing only when she reached Seris. The hybrid paused her work, looking down at the child with that blank expression they all maintained. I held my breath. Hybrids weren't now programmed to interact with children. Who knew how she would respond? Lyra tilted her head back, studying Seris with open fascination. "Your skin is like mine," she said loud enough that her voice carried across the suddenly silent bay. "But bluer." For several heartbeats, Seris didn't move. Then slowly she set down her tools and crouched to the girl's level, a gesture I'd never seen a hybrid make before. "Your skin has more violet," Seris replied, her voice flat but not unkind. "Valerian genes express more prominently through the dermal layer." Mercer had reached them by then, his face tight with anxiety. "I'm sorry," he said to Seris. "She's curious about everyone." But Seris wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Lyra's hands. The girl was holding something, one of those purple flowers I'd seen growing near the outer wall. Without a word, Lyra held it out to Seris. "I found this," she said. "It's pretty like you." I nearly gasped. In 3 years of observing hybrid workers, I'd never seen anyone offer them a gift. They were tools, not people. Yet here was this child treating Seris with the simple kindness most adults had forgotten. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the hybrids. Seris hesitated, then carefully took the flower. She held it the way someone might hold a bomb, with extreme caution and the faintest tremor. And though her expression remained neutral, I swear I saw something flicker in her eyes. Confusion, wonder, perhaps even gratitude. "Thank you," she said, the words sounding rusty as if rarely used. Dr. Mercer was watching the exchange with a scientist's keen observation. I could practically see his mind cataloging Seris' responses, noting the deviations from expected behavior. "We should let you get back to work," he said, finally gently pulling his daughter back. "I'm Elias Mercer. This is Lyra. We'll be stationed here for at least 6 months." Seris straightened the flower still in her hand. "I am Seris Maintenance Series 7. I oversee environmental systems in quadrants 3 through 6. The formal introduction was standard for hybrids, but the fact that she was still holding the flower was not. Typically, any non-essential object would be immediately discarded. As Mercer guided his daughter away, Lyra turned back and waved. Seris didn't wave in return. That would have been too human a gesture, but she inclined her head slightly, acknowledgement of the child's farewell. What the foreman and other workers must have seen was a routine interaction, perhaps slightly unusual due to the child, but nothing significant. What I saw was the first hairline crack in a system designed to keep beings like Seris from connecting with others. That night, long after my shift ended, I couldn't stop thinking about that brief encounter, about how the man had looked at Seris, not with the usual mix of discomfort and dismissal, but with genuine curiosity. About how the girl had offered a flower to someone everyone else treated as machinery. and most of all about how Seris had accepted it. I lay awake wondering what would happen if a being engineered to be Utirento suddenly found people who saw her as something more. As someone. I didn't realize then that I was witnessing the beginning of something impossible, something beautiful, something that would eventually challenge everything we thought we knew about what makes us human. 3 weeks after the Mercer's arrival, the facility's southern water reclamation system failed. Not a catastrophic failure, but serious enough to threaten the hydroponics lab where Dr. Mercer had set up his research station. I remember the alarm blaring at 0300, jolting me from sleep. Emergency protocols activated throughout the residential wing. By the time I reached the control room, technicians were already scrambling to reroute water flow from secondary systems. The foreman's face was tight with frustration as he barked orders into his comm unit. No, we can't wait for parts. That's 2 weeks minimum. If those plants die corporate, we'll have all our heads. Get someone down there now. I glanced at the monitor showing the lab. Dr. Mercer was already there moving specimen containers to higher shelves as water pooled around his ankles. His daughter was nowhere to be seen, probably still asleep in their quarters, thankfully. Sir, a technician called out, the damage is in junction that's in the thin atmosphere zone. The foreman cursed. Get the hybrids then. Any of them certified for underwater repairs. Only one, sir, Seris from maintenance. 10 minutes later, I watched from the observation window as Seris arrived at the flooded junction. She moved with that eerie efficiency that only hybrids possessed. But there was something else too. A sense of purpose that seemed almost personal. She waded into the knee-deep water without hesitation, special respirator already in place for the thinner air in that section. What happened next surprised me. Dr. Mercer appeared making his way through the flooded corridor in a full environmental suit. He wasn't supposed to be there. Civilians were restricted from maintenance tunnels during emergencies. But instead of ordering him back, Seris simply handed him a tool case. Hold this, she said, her voice slightly distorted through the respirator. I need to access the primary valve. For the next hour, I watched them work together in near-perfect synchronization. Mercer anticipated her needs, handing her tools before she even asked, holding lights at precisely the right angles. They barely spoke. They didn't need to. It was like watching a dance between two people who had somehow learned the steps separately. When the foreman noticed, he frowned. Why is Mercer down there? Get him out before he messes something up. Actually, we're done, I said, surprising myself by speaking up. They're making remarkable progress. Look at the pressure readings that they've already bypassed the damaged section. He grunted, reluctantly impressed. Fine, but I want a report on my desk explaining why a civilian scientist is doing maintenance work. I nodded, but my attention was already back on the monitor. Seris was submerged up to her shoulders now, working on something beneath the surface. Suddenly, she flinched, a reaction I'd never seen from a hybrid before, and pulled her hand back sharply. Mercer leaned forward, concern evident even through his faceplate. What happened? Electrical surge, Seris replied flatly. Minor. But Mercer wasn't having it. Let me see. Surprisingly, she complied, extending her arm. Even from the camera feed, I could see the angry burn across her palm. Mercer gently took her hand, examining the injury with professional care. This needs treatment, he said. It is functional, she countered. The repair must be completed first. I expected Mercer to back down. Most humans did when hybrids dismissed their own injuries. Instead, he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small medical kit. We can do both, he said firmly, already applying a cooling gel to her burn. Hold still. What happened next was so subtle I almost missed it. As Mercer treated her injuries, Seris watched his hands not with the usual blank assessment, but with something that looked almost like confusion or wonder. No one had ever treated her wound before, I realized. In the facility's eyes, damaged hybrids were either functional or not. Minor injuries weren't treated. They were noted in performance logs and ignored until they either healed or worsened enough to require major intervention. Yet here was this man treating her burned hand with the same care he might show a colleague. A person. They finished the repairs shortly after. The pressure normalized, the flood receded, and Dr. Mercer's precious plants were saved. Success by any operational metric. But I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, about how Seris had looked at Mercer's hands as they tended to her injury. That evening, I found myself walking past the hybrids dormitory section, an area I rarely visited. The door to Seris's minimalist quarters was ajar, unusual in itself. Hybrids were meticulous about privacy protocols. I paused, not intending to spy, but curious about what had changed. Through the crack, I saw Seris sitting on her standard-issue cot, staring at her bandaged hand. On the small utility shelf beside her bed was the purple flower Lyra had given her weeks ago. It should have withered and died days after being picked. Instead, it sat in a small container of water, still vibrant, still alive. She was keeping it alive. 2 days later, I saw Seris and Dr. Mercer talking in the corridor outside the lab. Their conversation seemed focused on the environmental controls, professional appropriate, but something had shifted between them. A barrier had fallen, replaced by something not quite friendship, but no longer the sterile distance between a human and a tool. Later that week, I passed by the recreation area, a sad excuse for a common space with mismatched furniture and harsh lighting. Lyra was there alone, drawing on a tablet. Curious, I glanced over her shoulder. She'd drawn 3 figures standing together, a tall man with dark hair, a small girl with purple-tinged skin, and behind them both a blue-skinned woman with watchful eyes. Beneath the drawing, in a child's careful letters, were the words, "She looks like a guardian." I looked more closely at how she'd drawn Seris. Not as the facility saw her, a maintenance unit, a hybrid worker. Not even as I'd seen her, isolated, programmed, constrained. Lyra had drawn her standing tall, protective, one hand extended toward the girl's shoulder. She'd drawn her like family. That night, I reviewed the security feeds again, a habit I'd developed since the Mercer's arrival. I wasn't the only one watching their interactions with Seris. The facility supervisor had flagged several of their encounters, noting unusual socialization patterns and potential behavioral anomalies. Standard bureaucratic language that masked a deeper concern, a hybrid forming attachments, was a hybrid that might start questioning orders. I should have reported what I'd seen. The flower, the drawing, the subtle changes in Seris's body language around the Mercers. That was my job, to observe and report. Instead, I found myself deleting the flags from the system, one by one erasing the evidence that something remarkable was happening right under the corporation's nose. Something was melting inside Seris, slowly, imperceptibly, like ice yielding to the first persistent rays of spring. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know what it would mean for her, for the Mercers, for the neat categories we'd all constructed to separate real people from manufactured ones. I only knew that I wanted to see what would happen next. Sometimes trust builds slowly, a careful bridge constructed one plank at a time across a dangerous chasm. Sometimes it grows in silence, in the spaces between words, in small acts of recognition. And sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with dramatic declarations, but with the simple, radical act of seeing someone for who they truly are, not what they were made to be. It happened in the darkness of the environmental testing lab 2 months after the Mercer's arrival. I wasn't supposed to be there, none of us were. The facility ran on strict schedules, with most sections powered down during the night cycle to conserve energy. But Dr. Mercer had requested special permission to monitor a time-sensitive experiment, and I'd volunteered to supervise protocol. Protocol required a security officer present whenever restricted areas operated off hours. I expected a quiet night of watching him take measurements and log data. What I didn't expect was for Seris to appear at precisely 0100, carrying additional sampling equipment. "You requested these, Dr. Mercer," she said, setting down the case with her usual precision. He looked up from his microscope, surprised but not displeased. "Thank you, Seris, but this wasn't scheduled. You should be in your rest cycle." Something flickered across her face, a micro-expression so subtle I almost missed it. The equipment would be needed by morning. It was efficient to deliver it now. I knew immediately she was lying. Hybrids didn't deviate from schedules without direct orders. They certainly didn't initiate unassigned tasks during their designated rest periods. Yet here she was, creating a reason to be in the same room as Mercer. More surprising still, Mercer seemed to understand. He didn't question her further, just nodded and gestured to a stool across from his workstation. "Since you're here," he said casually, "would you mind helping me catalog these samples? The native spores have some unusual properties I can't quite identify." She should have declined. should have stated that botanical analysis wasn't in her function parameters and returned to her quarters. Instead, she sat down and picked up a digital tablet. "What parameters are you cataloging?" she asked. For the next hour, I watched them work in companionable silence, broken only by occasional technical questions or observations. It might have seemed ordinary to anyone else, just two colleagues working late, but I knew better. I knew what it meant for Seris to be there at all. Around 200, Lyra appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She wore mismatched pajamas and carried a tattered stuffed animal, some earth creature I didn't recognize. "Dad," she mumbled, "I had the dream again." Mercer immediately left his station, kneeling beside his daughter. "Hey, Starlight, it's okay. We're safe here." "It wasn't about the ships this time," she said. "It was about Mom, about when they took her away." The room grew impossibly quiet. Even the equipment seemed to hold its breath. Mercer glanced at Seris, then back at his daughter. "Lyra, honey, we should talk about this in private." "Why?" the girl asked with a child's innocent directness. "Seris won't tell. She understands." Mercer looked conflicted. "Sweetheart, what makes you think Seris would understand about your mother?" Lyra turned to Seris, her eyes, those distinctly Valerian eyes, wide and knowing in a way that seemed beyond her years. "Because they did things to her too," she said simply. "I can tell." I watched Seris carefully. Her posture hadn't changed, her expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes had sharpened. She looked at Lyra with what I can only describe as recognition, one survivor seeing another. "You are correct," Seris said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I understand what it means to be altered." Mercer looked stricken. He gathered Lyra into his arms and sat on a nearby bench, his daughter curled against his chest. He studied Seris with new eyes, not the clinical assessment of a scientist, but the searching gaze of someone seeing past careful facades. "What did they do to you?" he asked quietly. For a long moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Hybrids never discuss their creation or modification processes. It was considered classified corporate information, and more importantly, they simply didn't volunteer personal information. But Seris looked at Lyra, then at Mercer, and something changed in her face. A decision made. The physical alterations were the simplest part. She said, her voice flat yet somehow heavy with unspoken weight, "Enhanced respiratory system, reinforced skeletal structure, dermal modifications for radiation resistance." She paused, her eyes focusing on something distant. "The neural modifications were more extensive." "Neural modifications," Mercer prompted gently. "They removed portions of my limbic system to prevent emotional attachment formation. They severed neural pathways between my reproductive centers and pleasure receptors. They installed inhibitors to prevent the development of long-term memory associations with individuals." The clinical way she described her own mutilation was more devastating than any emotional outburst could have been. Lyra buried her face against her father's shirt, but her small hand reached out towards Seris. "Did it hurt?" the child whispered. Again that moment of hesitation. "Yes," Seris finally said. "It did, but they told us the pain was proof it was working." Mercer's arm tightened around his daughter. "Lyra's mother was a Valerian botanist," he said suddenly, as if compelled to offer his own truth in exchange for hers. "We met during a research expedition. We weren't supposed to become involved, but we did." He looked down at his daughter's head. "When Lyra was born, the consortium claimed she was a violation of genetic propriety laws. They gave me a choice: leave the planet with her, never to return, or," he swallowed hard, "or surrender her for genetic resequencing." "And my mom?" Lyra asked in a small voice, though I suspected she already knew the answer. "They wouldn't let her leave Starlight. They said she had violated Valerian cultural agreements. She was reassigned to a distant outpost." "They separated you," Seris said, and there was a new quality to her voice, something almost like anger. "Because your connection was not sanctioned." Mercer nodded, a bitter smile touching his lips. "The irony is I was eventually allowed to return because of my research. But her reassignment is permanent. We're still being punished for the crime of loving across boundaries they drew." "Like me," Seris said quietly, "I exist between boundaries, neither human nor Valerian, designed to function, not to belong." The admission hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to be deemed wrong simply for existing outside prescribed categories. Lyra had fallen asleep against her father's chest, exhausted by emotion and late hours. Mercer carefully adjusted her weight in his arms and stood. "I should get her back to bed," he said. Then with unexpected directness, "Thank you, Seris, for telling us, for seeing us." Seris tilted her head slightly, considering. "You are both errors in their systems. As am I." The words could have been harsh, but they weren't. They were a recognition, almost a benediction. As Mercer carried his sleeping daughter toward the door, he paused. Would you, would you like to join us for dinner tomorrow? Lyra would enjoy the company, and so would I. Another boundary crossed, another protocol broken. Hybrids didn't share meals with humans. They consumed nutrient supplements in their quarters alone. "Yes," Sarah said, and though her expression remained composed, I heard something new in that single word. Anticipation, perhaps. Or hope. After they left, Seris remained at the workstation for several minutes. Her hand moved to her temple in a gesture I'd never seen from her before, fingers tracing a faint surgical scar hidden beneath her hairline. Then she carefully organized Mercer's research materials, shut down the equipment, and walked out into the darkened corridor. I stayed behind, my mind reeling with what I'd witnessed. They had taken so much from her, carved away the very parts of her brain that would allow her to form connections, to feel deeply, to love. Yet here she was, finding ways around those brutal excisions, creating pathways where they'd left only scorched earth. It made me wonder what is more fundamental to being human: the neurological structures we're born with, or the stubborn, persistent will to connect despite everything designed to prevent it. I didn't know the answer. But watching Seris walk away, her back straight, but her steps somehow lighter than before, I began to suspect that whatever makes us human goes deeper than biology, deeper than design, deeper even than the scars left by those who would shape us to their will. The storm caught everyone by surprise. Velar 4's weather systems were usually predictable to the minute. Computer models had reduced meteorology to a near-exact science. But that night, something in the planet's unstable atmosphere coalesced into a tempest unlike anything the facility had recorded. It started during the evening shift, just as the hydroponics team was finishing their work. Static electricity built up in the atmosphere, making hair stand on end and equipment malfunction. Then came the wind, screaming across the plains, carrying dust particles that could strip exposed skin in minutes. "Full lockdown protocol," the foreman's voice boomed through the comm system. "All personnel report to central shelter areas immediately." I was monitoring the emergency response from the security hub, watching as workers hurried to their designated areas. The main facility was built to withstand Valar's worst conditions, but the outlying buildings were more vulnerable. That's when I noticed 3 dots on the tracking system isolated in engineering. Outpost 12, a small monitoring station nearly a kilometer from the main complex. 2 human signatures and 1 hybrid. Elias and Lyra Mercer and Seris. They'd been checking on a specimen collection in the outpost when the storm hit. Now they were cut off with no safe way to return until the worst had passed. I opened a direct channel. "Dr. Mercer, this is security. We show you stranded at Outpost 12. Status report." His voice came back, partially obscured by static. "We're secure for now. Building integrity at 92, some minor breaches in the east wall, but Seris has sealed them temporarily." "Understood. Storm modeling predicts at least 6 hours until safe passage conditions. Do you have adequate supplies?" "Yes," he replied. "Emergency rations and water purification. We'll manage. Mercer out." I should have left it at that. I had other areas to monitor, other emergencies to manage. But something kept drawing me back to the surveillance feed from Outpost 12. Security cameras were still functional, giving me a grainy but clear view of the interior. The outpost was small, basically one room with some monitoring equipment, a small storage area, and emergency bunks. Seris was at the eastern wall, applying some kind of sealant to prevent further breaches. Mercer was checking the communications array, making adjustments to maintain their tenuous connection to the main facility. Lyra sat on one of the bunks, knees pulled up to her chest, watching the storm rage through a small, reinforced window. As the night progressed and the immediate crisis stabilized, I found myself returning to that feed again and again, not out of concern for their safety the building would hold, but fascination with how they were existing together in that confined space. Around midnight, the power in the outpost fluctuated. The backup generators kicked in, but the temperature control system failed. I watched as Mercer pulled emergency thermal blankets from storage, wrapping one securely around Lyra. "It's like camping, Bao," he told her with forced cheerfulness. "Remember when we camped on Proxima B and had to huddle in the tent during that ice storm?" Lyra nodded sleepily. "Mom made us hot chocolate with those weird blue marshmallows." "That's right," he said, his voice warm with memory. "She said they weren't really marshmallows, but some kind of fungal protein. Still tasted good, though." "Too sweet," said Seris unexpectedly from across the room. Both Mercers turned to look at her. "You've had valerian marsh foam?" Mercer asked, surprised. Seris hesitated, then nodded once. Early sensory calibration included taste testing of native substances. The blue protein clusters were registered as excessively saccharine. It was such a small thing, a shared reference, a point of commonality, but I saw how it changed the atmosphere in that small room. Suddenly, Seris wasn't just the efficient hybrid maintaining their shelter. She was someone with experiences, with opinions, even about something as trivial as alien marshmallows. As the hours passed and the storm howled outside, the temperature continued to drop. Lyra eventually fell asleep on the narrow bunk bundled in thermal blankets. Mercer sat beside her, gently stroking her hair. Seris remained at her post by the sealed breach, monitoring the integrity of her repairs. "You should rest," Mercer said quietly, looking across at her. "The seals will hold." "Hybrids require less sleep than humans," she replied. "I am functioning within optimal parameters." "That wasn't my question," he said. "Are you cold?" The question seemed to confuse her. Hybrids were conditioned to ignore physical discomfort unless it impaired function. The concept of being asked about her comfort was clearly unfamiliar. "My body temperature is lower than ideal," she finally admitted, "but not critically so." Mercer patted the space on the other side of the sleeping Lyra. "Body heat conservation is more efficient with a proximity. Basic survival tactics." He was offering her justification, a logical, practical reason to move closer, to join them. After a long moment, Seris crossed the room and carefully sat on the edge of the bunk. Her posture remained rigid, her face impassive, but she was there. For a while they sat in silence, Lyra sleeping peacefully between them. The storm raged outside, particles of dust and debris pinging against the reinforced walls like tiny missiles. "Thank you," Mercer said, "suddenly, for what you did earlier, sealing the breach so quickly. You saved us from exposure." "It is my function," Seris replied automatically. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Your function is to maintain environmental systems in quadrants 3 through 6. You're not assigned to this outpost. You didn't have to be here at all." She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than usual. "I have observed that Lyra is fascinated by the native flora. When she requested to see the specimen collection, it seemed optimal to accompany you both." "Optimal," Mercer repeated, a small smile playing at his lips. "Is that what they call it now?" Something almost like confusion passed across Seris's face. "What would be a more accurate term?" He considered this, his eyes never leaving her face. "Kindness, maybe, or friendship." "I was not designed for friendship," she said, and though her voice remained flat, there was a new tension in it. That capacity was deemed unnecessary. "And yet," Mercer said softly, "here you are." Lyra stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Instinctively, both adults reached to adjust her blankets. Their hands met over the child's shoulder. I held my breath, watching the feed. In normal circumstances, a hybrid would immediately withdraw from unexpected physical contact. It was part of their conditioning to maintain physical boundaries with humans, except when specifically directed otherwise for work purposes. But Seris didn't pull away. Neither did Mercer. For 3 heartbeats, 4, 5, their hands remained touching, his tanned and calloused. From fieldwork, hers pale blue and perfectly smooth. Then slowly, deliberately, Mercer turned his hand over and gently grasped her wrist. His thumb moved to the inside of her arm, where the skin was thinner, more vulnerable, where hybrids always wore protective covering while working. Except now, in the emergency, Seris had removed her standard work gear. Her arms were bare below her rolled-up sleeves, and Mercer's thumb was tracing small circles on the exposed skin of her inner wrist. Her eyes widened slightly. I could see her pulse visibly quicken in the vein beneath his touch, a physiological response she couldn't control. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Testing a hypothesis," he replied quietly, "about what they took from you and what they couldn't." Seris looked down at where they touched, as if the sight was both fascinating and frightening. "I don't understand what I'm feeling." "Don't you?" he asked gently. "It's not painful," she said slowly, "but it's intense, like a system malfunction, but pleasant." Mercer smiled, but there was sadness in it. "They tried to take away your ability to feel connection, to feel pleasure in touch, but they couldn't erase it completely, could they? They could only bury it." Sarah stared at their hands at the point of contact that seemed to be sending shockwaves through her carefully calibrated systems. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed simply. "It is." Yet neither of them pulled away. They remained there connected by that small revolutionary touch, while the storm raged around them and the child slept peacefully between them. I should have reported it immediately. Physical contact between workers and hybrids outside of necessary work functions was explicitly prohibited. It was considered a form of corruption, humans confusing hybrids with inappropriate social cues. But as I watched, Ceres's face watched as something ancient and beautiful and terrifying awakened in her eyes. I couldn't bring myself to file the report, because I was witnessing something miraculous, something that defied everything the corporation had built into her, everything they had cut away. I was watching her feel. Later, after they thought Lyra was deep asleep, I heard Ceres whisper something so quietly the audio barely picked it up. "There is a rhythm," she said, her hand now pressed against her own chest. "Not a malfunction. A pattern I haven't felt before." "What does it feel like?" Mercer asked. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to all questions. "Like music," she finally said. "But inside, quiet now, but growing louder." He smiled, then a real smile that reached his eyes. "That's how it starts," he told her. "For all of us." She didn't ask what it was. Perhaps she already knew. Or perhaps she was afraid to name it, this thing stirring to life inside a body designed to remain empty of everything except function. The storm continued through the night, but inside that small outpost, a different kind of storm had begun, one far more profound, far more dangerous than anything Valar's atmosphere could produce. A storm of awakening. The changes in Seris began subtly. So subtly that at first I thought I was imagining them. A slight alteration in her gait, less mechanical precision, more fluid motion. A fractional delay in her responses as if she were considering her words before speaking. Small deviations that wouldn't register on any performance evaluation, but to someone who had been observing her for months, they were unmistakable. 3 weeks after the storm, I noticed her lingering in the mess hall. Hybrids never lingered. They consumed their nutrient supplements efficiently and returned to their duties. But there she was, sitting at an empty table, watching the humans interact around her, watching with a focus that went beyond data collection. When Lyra bounded over to her table, the child had long since abandoned any pretense of maintaining appropriate distance from Seris. The hybrid's face changed. Not a smile exactly, nothing so obvious, but a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of her perpetually straight posture. "Dad says I can help in the specimen nursery today," Lyra announced, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Want to come see the new sprouts? They're purple like me." I expected Ceres to decline, to cite her scheduled duties, the protocols that governed her every movement. Instead, she checked the time display on her wrist and said, "I have 22 minutes before my next maintenance cycle begins. That would be sufficient time to observe the specimens." Lyra beamed and grabbed Ceres's hand without hesitation. And Ceres, who had been engineered to avoid physical contact except when necessary for work functions, allowed it. More than allowed it. Her fingers gently curled around the child's smaller ones, adjusting to the perfect pressure. Not too tight, not too loose, just right. They left together, the tall, blue-skinned hybrid and the bouncing, half-Valerian child, hand in hand. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Several workers paused mid-conversation, watching the unusual pair exit the mess hall. The foreman frowned deeply, making a note on his tablet. That evening, while reviewing security protocols, I received an alert. Hybrid medical evaluation request. I opened it immediately, my stomach tightening. It was for Seris, requested by Dr. Elias Mercer. I found them in the medical bay. Sarah sat on an examination table, her posture rigid but her eyes darting around the room in a way I'd never seen before. Hybrids didn't display anxiety. They didn't fidget. Yet her fingers were tapping in a regular pattern against the edge of the table. Mercer stood nearby operating a diagnostic scanner. His face was tense with concentration. "Dr. Mercer," I said, stepping into the room, "is everything all right? Your request flagged in our system." He looked up clearly, debating how much to share. Then he glanced at Seris, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "I'm conducting some routine tests," he said carefully. Seris reported some anomalous sensations. "Anomalous how?" I asked, moving in closer. Seris answered before Mercer could. "Increased tactile sensitivity, irregular temperature regulation, episodes of accelerated heart rate not correlated with physical exertion, and," she hesitated, then continued with a clinical detachment, "unexpected neurological responses to certain stimuli." "What kind of stimuli?" I pressed, though I suspected I already knew. Her eyes flickered to Mercer, then back to me. "Proximity to certain individuals." The implication hung in the air between us. I should have reported it immediately. Signs of malfunction in a hybrid were taken extremely seriously. They could indicate mechanical failure or worse, the beginning of autonomous behavior outside program parameters. But something in Mercer's expression stopped me. A mixture of concern and fascination. And something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "What do the tests show?" I asked instead. Mercer hesitated, then turned the display toward me. "See for yourself." The biochemical analysis was complex, but certain markers stood out immediately. Elevated oxytocin levels, increased production of estrogen, heightened neural activity in regions of the brain that should have been partially deactivated in hybrids. But what caught my attention, what made my breath catch in my throat, was a small notation at the bottom of the screen: follicular regeneration detected. I looked up sharply. "That's impossible." "I ran the test 3 times, Mercer said quietly. "Same result." "What does it mean?" Seris asked, and I was struck by the direct question. Hybrids didn't ask what things meant. They processed information, they analyzed, but they didn't seek meaning. Mercer took a deep breath. "It means your reproductive system is showing signs of activation. Your body is healing itself, reversing some of the modifications they made." Seris went very still. "I was designed to be sterile," she stated flatly. "The genetic sequences responsible for reproductive function were deleted, not merely suppressed." "Yes," Mercer agreed. "That's what makes this so extraordinary. It shouldn't be possible. And yet," he gestured to the display where the evidence flickered in irrefutable data points in chemical markers. I stared at the readings, my mind racing. "How?" I finally managed to ask. "What triggered this?" Mercer ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of both frustration and wonder. "I don't know for certain, but I have a theory." He looked directly at Seris. "I think it might be related to your interactions with Lyra, and possibly with me." "Explain," Seris said, and there was a new intensity in her voice. "Humans and many humanoid species are profoundly affected by social bonding," Mercer said. "Our bodies literally change in response to meaningful connection. Hormones shift, neural pathways strengthen, even gene expression can be altered." He paused. "They designed you to be isolated, but you're not isolated anymore." "You're suggesting that social interaction has initiated physiological changes?" Seris asked. "Not just any social interaction," Mercer clarified. "Deep connection, attachment, the kind they specifically tried to prevent by modifying your limbic system." "But I am not capable of attachment," Seris countered, though her voice held a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. "That capacity was removed." "Was it?" Mercer asked gently. "Or did they just make it difficult? Bury it so deep you wouldn't find it without help?" He moved closer to her, stopping just short of touching her. "Your body is telling a different story, Seris. It's saying that some things can't be engineered away. Some things are too fundamental to who we are." I expected Seris to reject this interpretation, To insist on a mechanical explanation, a virus perhaps, or some environmental factor that had disrupted her carefully calibrated systems. Instead, she looked down at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. When Lyra holds my hand, she said slowly, I experience a sensation of warmth, not physical warmth, something else. It begins here. She touched her chest and expands outward. And when you're near me, Mercer asked, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes intent. Seris met his gaze directly. It is different, more intense, sometimes uncomfortable. My heart rate increases 26%. My skin temperature rises. My focus becomes compromised. A smile tugged at the corner of Mercer's mouth. That sounds remarkably like attraction, Seris. Attraction, she repeated, testing the word. I am not programmed for attraction. No, he agreed. You're not programmed for it. That's what makes it real. The moment between them was so charged, so intimate, that I felt like an intruder witnessing it. But I couldn't look away, because I was seeing something I'd been told was impossible, a being designed to be empty, filling up with something powerful and transformative. The spell broke when Sarah suddenly tensed her hand, flying to her abdomen. What is it? Mercer asked, alarm replacing tenderness. A sensation, she said, sounding surprised. Like a contraction. Here, she indicated her lower abdomen. Mercer immediately ran another scan, focusing on that area. The results appeared on the screen, a flutter of activity in tissue that should have been dormant. It's starting, honey, he murmured, more to himself than to us. The regeneration is accelerating. Will it hurt her? I found myself asking. Mercer looked troubled. I don't know. This is completely uncharted territory. Her body is essentially rewiring itself, reversing modifications that were supposed to be permanent. He turned to Seris. You need to tell me immediately if you experience any pain or unusual symptoms. She nodded, but her attention was fixed on the display showing her own internal changes. This should not be possible, she said again, but this time there was wonder in her voice rather than denial. Later that day, I saw Seris in the corridor outside the hydroponics lab. She was standing absolutely still, her palm pressed flat against her abdomen, a look of profound concentration on her face. I approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. Seris, are you all right? She didn't immediately respond. When she finally looked up, there was something new in her eyes, a depth and awareness that sent a shiver down my spine. I can feel it, she said quietly. The change, it's like waking up. Parts of me that were asleep. Is it uncomfortable? I asked, genuinely concerned. She considered this with the careful deliberation she brought to all questions. Not uncomfortable, unfamiliar. It is. She struggled to find the words. It is like discovering rooms in a house you believed had only one. That evening, Lyra found Seris in the small observatory where off-duty workers sometimes gathered to view the planet's spectacular auroras. The hybrid was standing alone, watching the ribbons of light dance across the night sky. Seris, the child called, happily running to her side. Dad's looking for you. He wants to show you something in the lab. Seris looked down at the girl, and I saw it happen, the miracle the corporation had tried so hard to prevent. She smiled, a small tentative curve of lips that transformed her face completely. Lyra gasped, then giggled with delight. You smiled. You never smile. Sarah seemed startled by her own reaction. I did not intend to. That's what makes it good, Lyra said with a child's simple wisdom. It just happens when you are happy. She tilted her head. Are you happy, Seris? The hybrid was silent for a long moment, processing this question with the seriousness it deserved. I believe she finally said that I am discovering what happiness is. Lyra nodded sagely as if this made perfect sense. Then she reached up and took Seris's hand, tugging her toward the door. Come on, Dad's going to be so excited when I tell him you smiled. As they left, I heard Lyra say something that would stay with me through everything that followed. Something that captured in a child's perfect simplicity what was happening to Seris. Maybe your heart just needed to meet us first, she said. Sometimes things are sleeping until they find the right people to wake them up. Out of the mouths of babes, as the old saying goes. Because that was affecting what was happening. Something long dormant was awakening in Seris, something the corporation had tried to cut away, to engineer out of existence. something they feared more than any mechanical malfunction or system failure: her humanity. And once awakened, it would not easily be put back to sleep. That night, I deleted the medical logs from the central system, replacing them with a routine physical assessment showing all parameters within normal range. I knew what would happen if the corporation discovered what was happening to Seris. They wouldn't see it as the miracle it was. They would see it as a defect, a dangerous anomaly to be corrected or eliminated. I didn't know then how quickly things would escalate. I didn't know that in just 3 days, Seris's transformation would reach a crisis point that none of us were prepared for. I didn't know that the corporation already suspected something was happening, something that threatened the careful balance of control they maintained. I only knew that I couldn't be the one to stop it, not when I had seen her smile, not when I had witnessed the impossible becoming possible, one cellular change at a time. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't destroying a system. It's proving that the system was wrong all along. Wrong about what can be controlled, what can be engineered away, what can be denied. Wrong about what makes us human. The summons came without warning. 3 days after I'd observed Seris's first smile, an alert flashed across my terminal. Emergency Council convened, subject hybrid functionality assessment, location administrative level, time immediate. My stomach dropped. They knew. I hurried through the corridors, passing workers whispering in tight clusters. News traveled fast in the isolated facility. By the time I reached the administrative level, so a crowd had already gathered outside the main conference room. Inside the facility's highest-ranking officials sat in a semicircle: the director, the chief medical officer, the operations manager, and 2 representatives from corporate headquarters who had arrived on the morning transport. They rarely visited unless something had gone very wrong or threatened to. Standing before them, bewilderment evident on his face, was Dr. Elias Mercer. Beside him, looking impossibly small, stood Lyra, her hand clutched tightly in her father's. And completing the tableau, standing ramrod straight with her hands clasped behind her back in the standard hybrid posture, was Seris. But something was different about her. The carefully blank expression she'd always maintained now seemed forced to mask that no longer quite fit. Her eyes moved constantly, assessing exits, monitoring the officials, frequently returning to Mercer and Lyra as if to confirm their safety. The director spoke first. "Dr. Mercer, do you understand why you have been summoned?" Mercer straightened his shoulders. "I assume it has something to do with my research, though I've filed all the required reports." "It's not about your botanical work," the director said coldly. "It's about your unauthorized experimentation with corporate property." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're referring to." The chief medical officer tapped her tablet, and holographic data appeared in the air between them. Cellular images, hormone levels, neural activity readings, data I had deleted from the system, data they shouldn't have had. "These readings were automatically backed up to the secure medical server," she explained, noting my surprise. "They show significant anomalies in hybrid maintenance unit Series 7, anomalies that coincide precisely with your arrival at this facility." "I've conducted no experiments on Seris," Mercer replied, his voice steady. "If there are changes in her biological functions, they've occurred naturally." One of the corporate representatives scoffed. "Nothing about these units occurs naturally, Doctor. They are precision instruments designed for specific functions. Any deviation represents either sabotage or malfunction." "Or evolution," Mercer countered. The word hung in the air like a challenge. The operations manager leaned forward, hostility evident in every line of his body. "These units don't evolve, Doctor. They perform as programmed until they wear out. This one," he gestured dismissively at Seris, "is showing signs of severe system corruption. Emotional responses, decision-making outside parameters, and most concerning, reproductive system activation that was genetically locked out." I watched Seris closely as they discussed her, as if she weren't present. The old Seris would have remained perfectly still, face blank, accepting their assessment as fact. This Seris was different. A muscle twitched in her jaw. Her fingers flexed slightly at her sides. Small tells that spoke volumes about the changes within her. "We've reviewed your access logs, Doctor," the director continued. "You've spent an unusual amount of time with this unit. You've included it in non-work activities. Your daughter has been observed in a frequent contact with it. Mercer corrected sharply. Not it. Her name is Seris. The director's expression hardened. This behavior confirms our suspicions. You've developed inappropriate attachment to corporate equipment and somehow triggered malfunctions as a result. Lyra, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Seris isn't broken, she said, her young voice clear and defiant in the tense room. She's just becoming more herself. The corporate representatives exchanged glances. Dr. Mercer, one said with manufactured patience, please control your child. This is a serious corporate matter. My daughter is simply stating facts, Mercer replied. Seris has been demonstrating increased autonomy and emotional awareness. Far from being a malfunction, I believe it represents an extraordinary capacity for self-determination that your engineers failed to eliminate. Failed to eliminate. The chief medical officer raised an eyebrow. You're admitting you know these functions were intentionally removed. Mercer didn't flinch. I know you tried to create beings without the capacity for connection, for choice, for self-determination, and I know you failed. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. The director stood, his face flushed with anger. This unit will be immediately removed from service and transported to the Central Research Facility for disassembly and analysis. We need to understand how this corruption occurred so it can be prevented in future models. Disassembly, Mercer repeated, horror evident in his voice. You mean you'll kill her? It cannot be killed, doctor, the corporate representative said coldly. It can be decommissioned when it no longer functions as designed. Throughout this exchange, Seris had remained silent, her eyes moving rapidly between the speakers. Now, unexpectedly, she stepped forward. Every head turned toward her. May I speak? She asked, her voice steady but different, somehow less flat, more alive. The officials looked stunned. Hybrids didn't speak in proceedings unless directly addressed. They certainly didn't request permission to contribute. This is unprecedented, the operations manager sputtered. The unit is attempting to participate in its own assessment. Clear evidence of system failure. Or clear evidence that she has something to say, Mercer countered. Something you don't want to hear. The director studied Seris with narrow eyes, then made a dismissive gesture. Proceed, unit. State your operational assessment. Seris stood perfectly straight, her blue hands now relaxed at her sides rather than clasped behind her back. I am experiencing changes that were not part of my original design parameters. She began, her voice clear and measured. My neural pathways are forming new connections. My endocrine system is producing hormones previously suppressed. My reproductive system shows signs of regeneration. She paused, then continued with a directness that seemed to catch everyone off guard. These changes began after sustained interaction with Dr. Mercer and his daughter. Not through any procedure or intervention, but through relationship. Relationship? The chief medical officer repeated skeptically. You're not capable of forming relationships. Those neural circuits were specifically disabled. Yes, Seris agreed simply, yet here I stand changed. This suggests your understanding of what can be disabled, what can be controlled, is incomplete. A murmur ran through the room. Never had a hybrid spoken with such self-awareness, such calm assertion of their own experience. It was unprecedented, dangerous. This only confirms the severity of the malfunction, the director said firmly. Security escort the unit to containment level for immediate isolation pending transport. 2 security officers moved forward. I tensed, uncertain what I should do, what I could do against direct orders. But before the officers reached Seris, Lyra broke away from her father and ran to stand in front of the hybrid, arms outstretched as if to shield her. No, the child cried. You can't take her. She's not broken. She's becoming. The security officers hesitated, looking to their superiors for direction. No one had protocols for a child defender. The director's face darkened with impatience. Remove the child, then secure the unit. One of the officers reached for Lyra, but before he could touch her, Seris moved with startling speed. Not to run, not to fight, but to gently pull Lyra behind her, one blue hand resting protectively on the child's shoulder. The child will not be handled, Seris said, and though her voice remained calm, there was a new quality to it, a steely determination that made the officer step back. The corporate representatives were on their feet now, alarm evident on their faces. The unit is displaying protective behavior, one said urgently. This is exactly what the emotional inhibitors were designed to prevent. It's making independent value judgments. Of course she is, Mercer said, moving to stand beside Seris and his daughter, forming a united front. Because despite everything you did to prevent it, she's developed the capacity to care, to choose, to protect. The director's face had gone from angry to calculating. Dr. Mercer, I'm beginning to think you've deliberately sabotaged corporate property as some kind of social experiment. This could be construed as industrial espionage. Or it could be construed as proof that you can't engineer the humanity out of someone no matter how hard you try, Mercer countered. Seris isn't just mimicking emotions or malfunctioning, she's experiencing them, genuinely, profoundly. And if that's possible, if your perfect worker can develop attachments and make autonomous choices despite everything you did to prevent it, what does that say about your entire operation here? A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications were enormous. If one hybrid could overcome their programming, could others, could all of them? The corporation's carefully controlled workforce could transform into something entirely different, something with desires, demands rights. The chief medical officer broke the silence. We need to isolate the anomaly before it spreads. Security remove Dr. Mercer and his daughter, then take the unit to containment. The security officers move forward again, but this time I stepped between them and the unusual trio. Wait, I said, surprising even myself. Before we take irrevocable action, shouldn't we consider the scientific significance of what's happening? This could be the most important discovery since the hybridization process itself. Well, the director glared at me. Your job is security, not scientific assessment. My job is the safety and stability of this facility, I countered. And I'm not convinced that treating Seris as a malfunctioning piece of equipment rather than an evolving sentient being is in anyone's best interest, including the corporations. While the officials digested this, Mercer leaned close to Seris and whispered something I couldn't hear. Her eyes widened slightly, then she gave a barely perceptible nod. If I may, Mercer said loudly, drawing attention back to himself, I propose a compromise. Allow me to continue monitoring Seris's development under controlled conditions. Document the changes. Study them. This could lead to breakthroughs in understanding hybrid biology that would benefit the corporation in countless ways. The corporate representatives exchanged glances, clearly intrigued despite themselves. The potential for new patents, new applications, new profits was always compelling. And what guarantee do we have that this condition won't spread to other units? The operations manager demanded. None, Mercer admitted frankly, because I don't believe it's a condition that spreads. I believe it's a capacity that was always there, just suppressed. The real question is whether you're willing to face the implications of that. Another tense silence fell. I could almost see the calculations happening behind the director's eyes, weighing corporate interests against potential disasters, scientific discovery against control. Before he could respond, Lyra spoke again, her voice small but steady. Seris saved me during the storm, she said. When part of the roof collapsed, she covered me with her body. She didn't have to. Nobody told her to. She chose to. All eyes turned to the child, then to Seris. The hybrid met their gaze without flinching, neither confirming nor denying the child's account. Is this true? The chief medical officer asked sharply. Seris considered the question carefully, as was her way. Yes, she finally said. The structural integrity of the eastern section failed during peak wind velocity. A support beam dislodged. I calculated that it would strike Lyra. I intercepted it. What? The director demanded. Your primary directive is self-preservation to maintain operational status. Because, Seris said simply, her life was worth more than the potential damage to mine. The room went absolutely still. In those few words, Seris had expressed something profound, a value judgment, a moral calculus, a choice that transcended programming. The corporate representatives were whispering urgently to each other now. The director's face had lost some of its certainty. Even the security officers seemed unsure, shifting uncomfortably as they awaited clear orders. Finally, one of the corporate representatives stepped forward. This situation requires further assessment at higher levels. Until then, the unit will remain in service but under increased monitoring. Dr. Mercer, you and your daughter will continue your work, but with restricted access to this particular hybrid. We will reconvene when corporate has evaluated the full implications. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't defeat either. It was a stay of execution, a crack in the absolute certainty that had governed the facility's treatment of hybrids since its inception. As the meeting dissolved into murmured conversations and hurried departures, I watched Seris Mercer and Lyra. The child had slipped her hand into Seris's blue one. Mercer stood close beside them, his body angled protectively toward both. They looked like a family, unconventional, unexpected, unprecedented, but unmistakably bound by something the corporation had tried and failed to engineer away. Later that evening, I found Mercer alone in his lab, frantically packing specimens and research materials. "What are you doing, Dom?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He didn't look up. "They'll never let her live. Not once they understand what's happening. The best we got today was time." "You're leaving," I said. It wasn't a question. Now he did meet my eyes. "Yes, tonight. The supply transport departs at 200. We'll be on it. We have to." Myself, Lyra, and Seris. His gaze was challenging, daring me to object to invoke protocols and regulations. Instead, I asked, "How will you get her past security? Hybrids are tag monitored constantly." A grim smile touched his lips. "I'm a geneticist. Remember, I know how to mask biosignatures temporarily. Enough to get her on the transport at least." I should have reported him immediately. It was my duty, my job. "I can give you a 30-minute window," I said instead. "When the night shift changes, the monitoring system will show static playback for half an hour. After that," I shrugged, "you're on your own." Relief and gratitude washed across his face. "What between?" he asked simply. I thought about Seris's hand on Lyra's shoulder, about her simple declaration that the child's life was worth more than her own, about the smile that had transformed her face. "Because some things shouldn't be engineered," I said finally, "and some things can't be." He nodded once, understanding perfectly. 4 hours later, as the supply transport lifted off into Velar 4's turbulent atmosphere, 3 life signs registered on its manifest 2 human 1 unclassified biological specimen being transported for special research. By the time the corporation realized what had really happened, they would be beyond reach, lost in the vastness of space, seeking a place where being neither fully human nor fully alien wouldn't matter. Where what mattered wasn't what you were designed to be, but what you chose to become. The message arrived 6 months later, routed through so many relay points that tracing it would have been nearly impossible. Not that I tried. Some secrets deserve to be kept. It came in the form of a data packet labeled Botanical Research Update, innocuous enough to pass the facility's security filters. Inside was a brief text message with coordinates for a secured comm channel active for exactly 10 minutes, 48 hours from receipt. I waited those 2 days in a state of suspended anticipation, wondering what I'd hear, wondering if they'd made it, if they were safe, if Seris was still changing. When the moment finally came, I locked my quarters and activated the channel. For several seconds, there was nothing but static. Then the holographic display flickered to life, and I found myself looking at Elias Mercer. He appeared different, his hair longer, his face more relaxed than I'd ever seen it at the facility. Behind him, I could make out a simple dwelling. Wooden walls, large windows letting in golden sunlight. Not a sterile research station or a corporate outpost, but a home. "Hello, old friend," he said, smiling. "I won't use names or specifics just in case, but I wanted you to know that we're safe. We found a place on the outer rim, a small settlement, mostly refugees and freelance researchers. No corporate presence. They don't ask too many questions here." He shifted slightly, allowing the camera to capture more of the room behind him. Through a doorway, I could see what looked like a small garden, vibrant, with plants I didn't recognize. Standing among them was Lyra, taller now, her lavender-tinged skin glowing in the sunlight as she carefully watered each plant. "She's thriving here." Mercer continued, his voice warm with pride. "The local school has other mixed heritage children. No one looks twice at her. She's just a child, not an anomaly, not an experiment." Maybe. He paused, and I could sense he was building toward what he really wanted to tell me. "And our friend," he said carefully, The changes we observed, they continued, accelerated even once we were away from the facility. It's as if he searched for the right words. It's as if breaking free from that environment allowed something fundamental to wake up, something that had always been there, just waiting. The camera shifted again and my breath caught. There was Seris standing in the doorway between the house and garden. The differences were subtle at first glance. Her posture less rigidly perfect, her blue skin with a slightly warmer undertone. But as the camera zoomed in, I saw more profound changes. Her eyes, once calculatingly blank, now held depth and emotion. Her face had softened, the severe lines giving way to more natural expressions. And her hands, those perfectly designed tools, now moved with a grace that spoke of freedom rather than programming. As I watched Lyra bounded over to her, holding up a drawing, Seris crouched down to the child's level, examining the artwork with genuine interest. Then she did something that made my heart skip. She wrapped her arms around Lyra in a gentle embrace. Not the awkward approximation of human gesture that hybrids sometimes attempted, but a real hug, natural, instinctive warmth. I didn't know my arms could hold more than tools, I heard her say, her voice carrying faintly through the transmission. It still held that distinctive tonal quality, but the flat affect was gone, replaced by subtle inflections of wonder and tenderness. Mercer's voice came back as the camera returned to him. The physical changes continued too, he said quietly. Her endocrine system completely rebalanced. Neural pathways that had been severed somehow found new connections. And her reproductive system. He paused to smile, touching his lips. Well, that's the real miracle. Ooh. He gestured for someone to join him in the frame. After a moment's hesitation, Seris appeared beside him. She wore simple civilian clothing, a far cry from the utilitarian uniforms of the facility. But what truly transformed her appearance was her posture as she stood beside Mercer. Relaxed, comfortable, her shoulder lightly touching his, in a casual intimacy that would have been unthinkable months before. And then I noticed something else. Something that should have been saying impossible. Mercer's hand gently rested on Seris's abdomen, which showed the unmistakable curve of early pregnancy. The corporation said it couldn't happen, Mercer said softly. They said the genetic sequences for reproduction were deleted, not just deactivated. But they were wrong. His voice filled with wonder. Life found a way. Her body literally rewrote sections of its own code. We've been documenting the changes. The science is extraordinary. Seris placed her hand over Mercer's, her blue fingers intertwining with his human ones. The child will be unique, she said, her voice carrying that new warmth I still wasn't used to. Neither fully human nor hybrid, nor Valerian. Something new. Like me, came Lyra's voice from off camera, followed by her infectious giggle. Yes, Seris agreed, and the smile that transformed her face was radiant. Like you, a bridge between worlds. Mercer looked directly into the camera, then his expression growing serious. We're documenting everything. The physical changes, the emotional development, the pregnancy. Someday when it's safe, this information needs to reach others like her. They need to know what's possible, that what was taken from them can be reclaimed. They deserve to know they can wake up, Seris added quietly. I understood then that what I was witnessing wasn't just a personal transformation. It was the beginning of something far larger, a fundamental challenge to the corporation's entire approach to hybrid creation. If one could heal, could choose, could love, could create new life, then all of them had that potential. The implications were staggering. We don't have much time left on this channel, Mercer said, glancing at something off-screen. But there's one more thing you should see. The camera panned to a small table near the window. On it sat a collection of drawings, clearly Lyra's work. One in particular stood out, a blue-skinned woman holding a small, indistinct baby with Lyra and Mercer standing beside them. A family portrait drawn with a child's hopeful imagination. Next to the drawing sat something else. The purple flower Lyra had given Seris all those months ago at the facility. It should have withered and died weeks after being picked. Instead, it had grown its stem, now rooted in a small pot of soil, its blooms multiplied from one to many. Life adapts, Mercer said simply. It finds paths forward that we can't imagine. Even when we try to control it, constrain it, engineer it to our specifications. Given the right conditions, it will always find a way to become more than we designed it to be. As the transmission time dwindled, Sarah stepped closer to the camera. Her blue hand rested protectively over her growing child, her eyes, once empty, now filled with quiet determination. "I wasn't supposed to be a mother," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But life doesn't care what they designed you for, only what you choose to become." The transmission ended there, the image freezing on that final frame. Seris standing tall and free, choosing her own future, before dissolving into static. I sat in the darkness of my quarters for a long time afterward, thinking about everything I'd witnessed, about all the ways the corporation had tried to create the perfect worker, obedient, efficient, emotionless. How they'd cut away what they considered unnecessary connection, choice, reproduction. And how, despite everything, those capacities had found a way to return, not through technological intervention or medical procedures, but through the simplest, most human force of all, love. A child's hand offered in friendship, a man's respect and care, a family formed where none was meant to exist. I knew then what I needed to do. The data Mercer had mentioned, the documentation of Seris's transformation, would be invaluable to others like her. There were thousands of hybrids throughout corporate facilities, across dozens of worlds, all engineered to believe themselves incapable of the very things Seris had discovered within herself. They deserved to know the truth. It would take time, careful planning, but I would find a way to spread this knowledge, this hope, to others. Not as a revolution of violence, but as an awakening. A quiet reminder that no matter how thoroughly they tried to engineer the humanity out of someone, something essential would always remain. Waiting, watching, ready to bloom when offered the simplest gift of all connection. Because in the end, what makes us human isn't our genetics or our origins or the perfection of our design. It's our capacity to grow beyond what we were made to be, to forge connections that transform us, to choose who and what we become. If you've enjoyed this story of defiance against all odds and biological destiny, please hit the like button and subscribe to support the channel. And drop a comment below. I'd love to hear which part of Seris's journey resonated with you most. Was it the moment she first smiled when she protected Lyra during the storm? Or perhaps when she stood up to the corporation defending her right to become more than they designed her to be? Remember, sometimes the most powerful revolution isn't destroying a system. It's proving that the system was wrong all along. Until next time, keep challenging the boundaries others set for you. After all, life doesn't care what they designed you for, only what you choose to become.